So thank you everyone for coming. I can see the screen perfectly to answer your question. This is great. And thank you very much, Dr. Verma, for giving us your time today and sharing your remarkable ideas. I got a glimpse of some of the slides and I can't wait for what's coming. So this is one of our webinar series on disseminating science. It's a partnership between Child and Family Global Outreach Group and ISSBD. And the title for today, or the topic for today, we're going to talk about scholarship for change, equity, justice, and sustainability. So we have with us Dr. Suman Verma, who is emeritus at Panjab University in Chandigarh, India. And Dr. Verma is a developmental psychologist who's published work on child labor, adolescent family life, school stress, abuse, interventions, COVID-19, PYD, and social policy. Oh wow, twice a CASPAS Standard Fellow, which is a remarkable group. She's an ISSBD fellow, also an associate editor for IJBD, and is an ISSBD fellow as well. Serves on several editorial boards and is a member of several academic committees. She's one of the guest editors for JRA, special issue on COVID-19 and adolescent development for 2025. And yes, so she's the former head of the Department of Human and Development and Family Relations. And we are very happy to have Dr. Suman join us today. So I'll let you take it away and we'll present, I believe, for about 45 minutes, and then we can facilitate some questions for about 15 minutes after that. So thanks everyone for joining.
Should I get started?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Tanya, for your kind introduction, and greetings to all who have joined in today. As you know, my topic is on scholarship for change, equity, justice, and sustainability in action. So I prepared a shorter talk so that we have more time for interaction. So I'm looking forward to an interactive session with you all. So I begin with a personal anecdote. Decades ago, I'm pretty ancient, So this is way back in the early 1990s. I was attending a conference wherein I heard a presentation on stress among children in disadvantaged settings, basically a slum area. So the study was very well planned. Methodological rigor, the interpretations, and major highlights that I remember now were in terms of children are undergoing a lot of academic stress. There is pressure of non-comprehension. There were psychosocial problems related with mental health issues and so on. So my question to the presenter was that have you shared your findings with the teachers, the school wherein you conducted your work, or the counselors over there, or parents, or any NGO who was working in the community? So the answer was in the negative. This kind of raised an uncomfortable question in my mind that if research that doesn't reach those who can use it, so what purpose does that kind of a research serve? So this has this issue of social impact has stayed with me all throughout my career, and I've tried to integrate it as much as I could. Okay, so why scholarship for change? The kind of world that we are living in, there is polycrisis everywhere. You have the economic, environmental, geopolitical, you have wars devastating children, families everywhere. And developmental psychologists are increasingly called upon to respond to widening social inequalities, climate related risks, displacements, structural injustice affecting children, adolescents, families worldwide. So, the question that we face today is not of what we know, but what our knowledge does. So, this webinar is about how we can design research that contributes not only to theory, but also to equity, justice, and sustainable developmental futures. So, why equity, justice, and sustainability matter? Developmental psychology is not just a value neutral, it's embedded in social systems. Social systems wherein there is inequality, climate related risks, displacements, digital divides. So, this gap between academic knowledge and lived realities of children and families exists. We need to examine the unequal access to opportunities, recognizing power, representation, structural exclusion, and ensuring that developmental opportunities for future generations is maintained. Another issue is on dissemination, which is an ethical responsibility, and it starts with questions that matter to real communities. How do we design research questions through an equity lens? There are some key concepts that we could look at. Equity begins at problem formulation. This has to be right in terms of our value that we are going to look at it from the equity perspective, which is grounded in structural inequities. We need to avoid deficit models, centering on resilience, agency, and strengths. And also ask questions like what systems produce this outcome? So the individual versus the along, which is structured in a social setting. The design should move beyond publishable questions to socially consequential questions. Who is missing or silenced? Does the question challenge or reinforce power hierarchies? We need to also align with the sustainable development goals that we have as a framework now, the UN Convention on Child Rights and social justice frameworks. So aligning with and okay, and we also need to balance with the global theories that we have with local developmental realities. So, how do we do that? So, equity oriented research draws from various theoretical orientations. You all must be familiar with this. So, I'm just going to very briefly mention a few. There are many more, but I just picked on these. The ecological system theory, Brownton-Brenner, wherein development occurs within nested environmental systems, is shaped not only by individual and family factors, but also by schools, communities, policy environments, structural social inequalities. Then we have the developmental system theory, Lerner and Overton, wherein development occurs due to dynamic interactions between individuals and contexts, leading to adaptation and resilience in unequal conditions. You have the positive youth development framework by Lerner and many others. This is a field that has really rapidly grown, and you have contributions from very different uh, countries, which is strength-based view of youth development, emphasizing agency, competence, contribution, and in a way moving beyond the deficit model. The critical developmental psychology, theorists like Berman, Cole, Spencer, which highlight the effect of power, marginalization, structural inequality in shaping development. They represent justice and representation, basically. We have the capability approach by Sen, Amartya Sen, and Nussbaum, wherein development is about expanding real opportunities and capabilities, focusing on justice and opportunity structures. So, all these theories have endorsed the role of culture and context, sorry, is what I wanted to say, context that matters. As an example, I am very fond of sharing this work by Garcia Cole and her colleagues, the integrative model of developmental competencies in minority children. This is an excellent work that talks of the kind of impact a context can have on individual behavior. Children from marginalized groups develop within contexts shaped by discrimination, social stratification, adaptive cultural processes. Structural position variables, they highlight those that shape experiences through mechanisms such as racism, discrimination, segregation, influencing access to resources and opportunities. Other highlights are on promoting and inhibiting environments such as risks, which are poverty and marginalization experiences, and protective cultural resources, which are family networks, cultural identity, community support, which affect adaptive culture that helps to navigate social challenges. Other aspects highlighted are on child characteristics and family processes, wherein children actively interact with their environments and families play a central role in mediating structural inequalities. So, this model shifted the developmental research towards contextualized understanding of minority development, highlighting how structural inequality and cultural assets jointly shape developmental competencies among children. So, a major theoretical shift in research has been moving from deficit models to structural models. So, the traditional focus, if we look at, was on individual deficits, maladjustment, for example, risk behaviors. An equity oriented focus now would be on opportunity structures, institutional barriers, adaptive responses to adversity. So, for example, educational disengagement may reflect school exclusion, discrimination, or lack of institutional support, and not just only motivation. So, shifting language shifts responsibility from child to structures. So, another example is of positive youth development research. And PYD has reframed youth as resources, contributors, agents of change. And we've seen, just as an example, I'm sharing just a couple of highlights of this scoping review, which I was a co author with Ingrid Schoon and others for a special issue of JRA on the COVID 19 pandemic and adolescent development. What we worked on was this review on the COVID 19 pandemic and young people's civic engagement, is what we looked at. If you go back and think of the COVID 19 days, the whole world was affected and there were emergencies all the time, and you found how youth stood up, whether in communities or outside hospitals, helping each other. So, this particular review really helped us see that across you found that youth, where all they got supportive environment, such as online learning facilities, support for basic needs, promotion of their initiatives which they had in their communities, it helped build leadership skills, agency, civic responsibility, community engagement, and social integration. So, PYD research really has helped us move from the deficit to the strength based perspective. Okay, let's pause over here. I would want you to think as we go along on what do you think will, who do you think will use your research 5 years from now? Okay, moving on to justice in developmental research, wherein we recognize power and voice. So, justice oriented research asks whose experiences shape developmental theory, whose development is considered normative, and who benefits from research findings. We all are familiar with the general discussion about Western theories based on middle class Western sample and the applicability in other settings. So these are some of the questions that help us work on along with these theories and extend them so that they are applicable in diverse settings. Some of the theoretical influences, as I mentioned earlier, were critical theory, the post-colonial perspectives, community psychology. For example, standard parenting scales often interpret collective caregiving practices as lack of parental involvement, whereas in many contexts, caregiving is distributed across extended kin networks. So it's important as we do research to have inclusive samples and culturally valid measures to capture true experiences of the population that we are studying. Looking at methods for justice oriented research. No method can rescue a poorly framed question. Foremost is what are we asking? And that's what would help us look at or get true answers from the communities that we are studying. So, research designs can either reinforce or challenge inequality. Some of the approaches which you would be all familiar with, the participatory research, when participants can help share questions and help in interpretation. This I've found is a very, very helpful kind of an activity wherein we look at, once we've done our research, the findings, we go back to our section of our sample and share the results with them and ask certain questions wherein we feel that it's difficult to interpret why this particular uh, why the result has come in. So these validation sessions I find are extremely important, and they are possible in participatory research. An example I can think of here is I was doing this cross cultural research on street children. We had sampled from Africa, Philippines, we had India and Indonesia. So in Indonesian sample, in we had results which showed that a particular shelter wherein the children used to go at night, they had all positive points in terms of the physical amenities, the food, the health care, etc. However, we saw that the emotional states were very low and we couldn't really figure out what's really happening. So, when we went back for a validation session with this particular group of children, we were told how there's rampant physical abuse going on in this particular shelter, which probably could have been one of the reasons why the children were not happy there, but they had no choice and therefore they were going. So I strongly believe that for us to go back and do our validation session is really very important. Mixed methods to combine statistical patterns with lived experiences. Then community engagement, which helps build long-term relationships with communities where we work or local institutions and organizations. And then longitudinal designs, if we want to capture structural change, whether it's in an institution building or it's in a particular program or whatever work that you are doing. For example, youth led participatory research on school climate can reveal experiences of discrimination and exclusion that surveys alone may miss. So, methodological rigor and social relevance are not competing goals. Many times we think that if it's a theory based work as compared to an impact based, we are compromising on the methodology. No, both of them go side by side. For example, participatory adolescent research. So, adolescents, if we have them as co researchers documenting school climate, these outputs can be shared with the school authorities, the local government to see and how this would impact change in that particular institution. Similarly, qualitative and quantitative integration, where the survey data on stress plus narrative interviews explaining why stress persists helps us interpret the real experiences of children and enables policy relevant recommendations for that particular area. We need to avoid extractive research. We need to return to the community, share the results, and in their language. It's important to share results in their own language that they know what really the findings of that particular work are. And sharing data ownership or authorship where appropriate. That's an ethically important aspect that we all need to keep in mind. So, ethics beyond consent. We all are familiar with the IRB boards, which are there, and we have this checklist of ethics, that we need to tick mark. But there are broader ethical responsibilities and concerns in my mind, I feel, which are not part of that checklist. Representation and voice, extractive research practices. We need to also the checklist, I haven't seen one that says that are you going to go back to the community? What are the long-term goals that you have? Maybe now they are there. But to my mind, there are certain things which we have to go beyond what is being asked by the IRB committee. We need to avoid stigmatization. We represent communities respectfully and ensure reciprocity. When we go, we need to get back to them with either our results or any other issue that they want. This give and take is something which is ethically a part of our responsibility. For example, research on high risk neighborhoods must contextualize findings within structural inequalities rather than labeling communities as deficient. We pause here again. Think about, where do your research questions come from? Theory, funders, or communities? We can take up these in the discussion time, but I thought these were important questions for us to ask ourselves and reflect upon. Moving on to sustainability in developmental science. Sustainability refers to long-term developmental conditions that are necessary for children and families to thrive. I think there are three dimensions to sustainability: the social sustainability, which refers to reducing intergenerational inequality; the environmental sustainability, understanding developmental impacts of climate change; and the institutional sustainability, wherein we strengthening education and social systems. So, climate related displacements are affecting children's schooling and mental health. An example, how displacements is affecting their schooling and bringing anxiety in them for on their futures. So, sustainable research leaves behind skills, trust, and usable knowledge for the community at large. So, long term partnerships with schools or communities. When you're doing your research, I think it's important for us to decide what area are we going to work in, wherein are we, going to, do our research. And the continuity from one thing on to another leaves behind a collective work which is highly meaningful. So we have to have long-term partnerships. It's important that you have short-term outcome goals so that the communities believe that you are there to help them or you're there for their upliftment and policy. It'll reach the policy in terms of what all needs to be done. I've experienced this research fatigue. Many a times you find that there are communities where most people go, whether it's convenient, it's accessible for several reasons. I remember years ago, I'd gone to a slum area with my students, and we were looking at the early childhood education facilities available for children in that particular slum. And this mother who we were trying to, interview, she says, "Now you all have also come. We have so many people who have been coming for years over here, but there have been no change. We don't have enough water, we don't have enough electricity, and we tell everyone that, but nothing has happened." So we have to be careful about this research fatigue that may be there in the community. So when we work with communities, it's important that we are very transparent with our goals. We share our goals with them, what are we there for, and have short outcomes so that they can see the outcome and say, okay, so this is a group that means that they are there to help us and not just extract information and they kind of disappear there, which could happen in different ways. Let's say training local researchers or practitioners as part of the project, designing findings that inform scalable policies and not just pilot only solutions. Addressing equity and sustainability also requires collaboration across fields. You'll find the general trend these days is that you work together with others from interdisciplinary perspectives, and that enriches your research. It enriches your perspective in terms of looking at individual. As development psychologists, we have been focusing more on that and structural systems that impact development. So when sustainable outcomes really come when communities no longer need us to tell their stories and they are empowered and they are able to cope and deal with their issues on their own. Okay, as an example, looking at research on climate change and youth well being. So, emerging research shows how climate change affects mental health, migration patterns, education stability, the incidence of floods and droughts and heat stress has led to families migrate, and we all know about climate change. So, adolescents experiencing climate anxiety is linked to uncertainty about environmental futures. And this is a long term effect that we are seeing, which is coming on children, all age groups. So, as developmental scientists, we must increasingly address environmental sustainability and intergenerational justice in our research that we undertake. Moving on to dissemination. This is one of our responsibilities, which really is something which is missing from right from the planning stage. Dissemination has to be an integral part of your research proposal, and it has to be designed with the end user in mind. And dissemination is not something that we do at the end of our work. It is something that should be ongoing as your research work carries on. So the key audiences depends on what you're working on, are the policymakers, could be the practitioners, the teachers, the clinicians, the social workers, the field level health workers that are working in the communities and caregivers, and media and civil society organizations. So these are somehow the key audiences, and we need to plan how we need to reach out to them, keep them in our focus, and take them along as we go along in our research. The different dissemination formats which are there: policy briefs. Policymakers always like very brief, actionable points of one page. Practitioner toolkits, op-eds and public essays, reaching out in the newspapers, and is something that you're able to reach out to different kinds of audience. And the general visibility of your work comes when you are disseminating and you have these people along with you as you go along. It could be a meeting in the community that you tell them what you are doing at different times. It could be, and you have one of the policymakers attend that meeting. They love to be chief guests. So, involving the community and the dissemination work, write about it in different formats. There could be visual summaries and infographics, which are great for field level workers or for community at large, you see. So, there are different ways that we can have dissemination, and it should be an ongoing process for impact. And public writing, I feel, is a legitimate scholarship. So it's not just that we think of our journal writing, but it's not easy to write for public, but it's something which is very, very important. Okay, so your role, coming to specifics now, you're socially responsible as researchers. You are knowledge producers, you are translators of evidence, collaborators with communities and institutions. So you have a very important role to play. But there are challenges too, we all understand, to balance academic expectations with socially engaged scholarship. But I feel this is an opportunity for us developmental scientists to inform policies shaping the lives of children and youth. And I think a lot of institutions have now kind of balanced and socially impactful work, policy oriented research, applied research is equally evaluated in very positive terms. So, reframing scholarship, what we study, how we frame it, signals whose lives we value. From knowledge production to knowledge for change, moving from what is development to for whom, under what conditions, and to what end. So scholarship is a form of social participation, and designing impact is not accidental, it is planned. So, impact is something which has to be a part right from the beginning, part of our research planning, and aligning with The UN Convention on Child Rights, the SDGs, provides a broad framework wherein, if we also combine it with interdisciplinary collaborations, you have excellent research designs that can emerge, which make a difference in lives of the samples that we are working. So, for example, studying adolescent resilience, not as coping despite deficits, but as adaptive responses to chronic structural stressors such as poverty, migration, caste, conflict. These are important stressors that need to be an integral part of our research work. So I'm summarizing now. This is my last slide where I say scholarship for change, and I've tried to have this figure. I hope it makes sense. So, as researchers, our foundational values, if they are on equity, justice, and sustainability, they would reflect in our research process that would have developmental impact. So, right at the problem framing stage, we integrate the impact of context in terms of culture, inequality, institutions, and any others which are there in the setting, which is reflected in the design and knowledge production. Yeah? It's disseminated. Also, in terms of sustainability, are effective long term partnerships with communities, practitioners, and policymakers helps in a long-term impact, developmental impact on policies, programs, institutional change, and community well-being. So transforming research into action to advance children's development and social well-being. So scholarship for change is not a different kind of research. It is a research that connects theory with evidence and social responsibility. It's a tool not just for explanation, but also as a pathway to change. As a closing reflection, if you could change one aspect of your research practice to make it more responsive to issues of equity, justice, or sustainability, what would it be? This is a question more to initiate discussion. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we can close the slides so that we can look at each other.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Verma, for that outstanding talk. Many of your ideas, I think, resonated with me, and I think the audience as well. And so we have time for, I think, a great discussion. I think people shouldn't feel shy to maybe turn on their cameras, or if that's not possible for you, that's okay as well. You can also put your questions in the chat. And again, as Dr. Verma pointed out, they don't have to be questions, but we could just have a discussion about how to do, better engaged and purposeful research, developmental science. So if anyone would like to start, or if Dr. Verma would like to put a question or topic out to the group, would be great as well.
Okay, let me put another question. So, are there any barriers that you face in your institution to do research for social impact?
I think we have a hand by Pamela.
Hey, Suman, I'm in a noisy place in a cafe, so I will not put on my camera. But I really like the point that researchers should do. You gave an example of public access. That is so important. And I think as researchers, we should put aside time to do that, knowing very well that in many of our institutions, that does not count towards our promotion, but it's a responsibility that we have towards the community. So if we look at it in that way, then it's easy to do. But I also wanted to pick up on your dissemination, where you say you can disseminate widely, of course. And I have this experience that I think it's important to share because you talk about it, in that dissemination begins, I believe it begins from even the conceptualization of the problem. You know, when you work with the community and come together with what is important to them, you are already raising awareness among them and to you and to your investigating team of that problem. So I think dissemination works from the beginning, and there could be different stakeholders at different points of where you want to disseminate. For example, at the beginnings, the community, you're working with them to develop the question. Although you're going to work with them throughout, in the middle, you could pull in some policymakers and so on. And about the use of these findings, for example, if you're working with teachers as your research assistants, one, you leave behind some skills among the institution. You make them strong, as you said. And you know, as I'm just still on the dissemination. You're already disseminating your findings as it is emerging. So I think you really given an excellent talk. And then just one statement in response to the question you've posed. I think the hardest thing, the hardest thing is that many times as researchers, we use our grant funding and our grant opportunities to gain promotions also in our jobs, which is also a legitimate pursuit. And sometimes the promotion atmosphere is so competitive that you end up losing focus on focusing on the community, and you really focus on yourself. So that could be one failing of researchers. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thanks, Pam. I think you've raised a very important question, and this is a tension for scholars. But I do believe that evaluation systems are changing now, and we do value applied research, and let's say one with working with communities and social impact is valued again. But again, it differs from one, the institutions onto another. But, in terms of dissemination, that's very true that it has to be right from the beginning. It has to be a part of your plan in terms of how do you disseminate and share, and you take the community and people there along. Thank you.
We have a couple of other hands. I think Elizabeth, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you so much, Dr. Suman. I'm also happy to respond to your presentation. It's been a good presentation. I'm calling from Uganda. So I'm happy to be on this team for today. It's very important really to involve the communities where we carry out our research and help them participate, because like the previous presenter has said, that it helps them to leave a skill behind, yes, but also these people who participate are able to explain maybe to the local person much more in their own language what you're doing, and they would be able to understand what is going on in their community. Because many times when we carry out research, we carry all our data and go on to present it somewhere else. And at times we only pick a few of the representatives from the community that come to attend the dissemination, and then you find the rest do not know what feedback it was. But if it is an ongoing feedback, bit by bit, as you have said, we need to plan it during our conceptualization and know how it shall come in every other time we carry out an interaction with the community, give them feedback and to their own language, like you said, because the research language may be difficult for them to understand. And some of them, like you have said, because of inequalities of poverty, you find that the leaders will just accept, because at times you're giving them a little transport or some funds for contributing. So some of them are taken up more by what you're going to give them than what they can learn and contribute to their community. So I think this is very important to include and to think about in our research, and also to make sure that we plan it and make sure we participate and contribute to community development. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think while you were speaking, it also came in my mind that many times I find that we think that the communities are not interested in what we are doing, but no, they are very interested, and they do want to know that what are so it's not only creating awareness, but it's like we are undermining their interests. They're very, very keen to know what it is, and if it concerns them, their children, they certainly would be extremely supportive of our activities. So it's really for our own supportive and creating environment in the community that we should be sharing with them as we go along.
And
Someone asked
maybe
about a question. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to say, sorry, that maybe in their participation, as you discuss with them, you may find you can get some of them giving you some contribution of ideas of something, some more information that you didn't think you would even get from that kind of people.
Absolutely. It's a reciprocal relationship. Absolutely. Yeah. Someone
Thank
asked
you.
about other media platforms. Absolutely. Now there are blogs people write, which, are read so widely. You are on, social media. I think dissemination of any form is something which is what we should undertake. People haven't come up with barriers. I'm very keen to know, why is it that, is everyone doing research with social impact in mind, or is it our interests? What are the barriers that Pam mentioned one in her thing, but that's Africa, but it may not be there in other parts of the globe.
I have
So,
some barriers that I'd like to discuss, but first I saw that we have a hand from
okay.
Marvin. Would you like to go ahead?
Look, thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. Professor Verma has brought out very pertinent issues, especially I'll give an example in the context of Africa. And we not only can we use the channels that have been presented to us, I think as researchers, to some extent, we've become reluctant on dissemination. And I think I would advise that we find very innovative way to disseminate our research. We've provided that there are a lot of really many platforms that can be used. Going to the barriers, as much as we have emphasized strong research, we have not emphasized strong institutions that really help to influence policy as well as create social impact. And one of the barriers that I've noticed in my country is political interference. We are, to some extent, we make policies and then we do research later, which is not supposed to be the case. I've heard a lot of people have come up with very concrete research, and the politicians have thrown that away. No wonder. In other ways, I would say, as much as we emphasize strong research, we also need to leverage on strong institutions that would support our dissemination. I think the biggest barrier is political interference. I submit. Thank you.
Yeah. But if you if your work gets visibility, if your work is, it's there in the newspapers, on social media and others, will your institution or the seniors not be affected? Will they not acknowledge that this is good work?
Well, Professor, a politician being a politician, they have their own opinion, and they put their work first. It's political leverage than policy or proper research. So I think I've seen several good research which have just ended up on shelves because politicians feel it is not going to make them popular. They do not look, unfortunately, most of them don't look at the next generation. They look at the next election, which is very sad. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a hand by Lynette or Lene.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful contribution And now I know what to do. I was wondering what I can do in my situations. And I just want to mention some of the barriers of experience, especially with the gatekeepers, and where you're required to have a buy-in, collaborate. But now, when you find that you're dealing with institutions like yeah, I'm in education, and then there's a change of guard, and the previous person did not hand you over to the new person, your study may suffer, and especially if you're not bringing in something to oil their hand. And then also with the administrative, the chiefs and other people, yeah, generally the gatekeepers, you may actually end up with your outcomes going to the shelves and not coming, helping the people you are trying to um, try to find solutions to their challenges. So I've experienced that, and now look at the pathways towards solving that kind of challenge. But thank you very much for your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynette, I think you raise a very important issue because we are affected with all these, we are living with people and there is political, give and take happening all the time. But we have to find our trajectory and how best we can make of the situation which is there. All scholars have gone through difficult times in terms of their work that they have been wanting to do. Sometimes it's nice to read about them and how did they negotiate. And Frank Kessel will be very happy. He edited this volume on pillars of developmental psychology, which came from Cambridge University Press last year. And this is on autobiographies of many of us who've written for it in terms of how did we negotiate all these challenges. So sometimes it's nice to read what people have been doing in the past, So if you can look up that and read about, because these challenges all of us have faced in institutions. Where there are institutions, you have these, all kinds of barriers and individual temperaments affecting, our work output.
Could you say the name of the book again,
This
please?
is Pillars of Developmental Psychology, and Frank Kessel is the editor. And these are all autobiographies written by various developmental psychologists. This is Cambridge University Press.
What a wonderful idea. And I think that would be great, especially for
Yes,
younger
for
scholars,
scholars to read and how
yeah.
things came up and how the theories formed and what are the issues that we faced over years. Yeah, there are a whole lot of them over
Um,
there.
These are all fantastic questions and topics. I just wanted to raise you asked about barriers, and I just wanted to raise one small question.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's small or just a comment.
yeah,
But so I try to do community engaged science. I do developmental psychology across cultures. And I've worked primarily in East Africa and now for the last, I don't know, 15 or more years in South Pacific. And it's trying to combine theoretical research with applied and the present day immediate concerns of the communities that I'm working with. So often my research and my questions aren't immediate. They're interesting to folks there and we disseminate, but they're not exactly, and we try to tie them in, you know what I mean, to things that are
yeah,
relevant in the communities and maintaining their cultural heritage and documenting it. But
yes,
in reality, nothing has changed. Do you know what I mean? And so we have a great relationship, but I feel like we're not actually making much progress. And we have the tools and we could be, right? And we have access to funding. And so it's just marrying the theory with the applied work that I personally struggle with. And I know my colleagues do as well. And I know that some people, like somebody he mentioned, Dr. Stephen Asatsa, are doing a really good job of that. There are great examples out there, but they're few and far between. So I just wonder if you had any comments or advice.
yeah, Tanya. I think you see when we are kind of looking at theories and trying to see whether it works in this particular setting, right? So there are some universal but there are some basic conceptualization assumptions that would be as per that particular diverse setting. And we are really extending those theories, you see, so that they are applicable in diverse settings. So sometimes the change occurs slowly. Maybe we are a little impatient to say, why don't we see this happening? Because change takes time, whether it's in terms of people, in their behavior, that it's so difficult to change each other. So, so I think if you're doing the right thing and you're representing their lived experiences, you're looking basically endorsing their practices and integrating that in your measures, I think you're doing great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have to have belief in ourselves, and rest, I think things take time.
Okay, I see a question about getting a copy of the slides. Yes, I will figure that out.
I've
It's my
shared
first
them with
time.
Patrick.
Yes,
So
okay, great. So you'll share them with Patrick and we'll figure out a way
he
to
has
get
it
them to all
already.
of the, okay,
Yeah,
great. And we'll figure out a way to get them to the
sure,
audience.
sure.
And I'm not sure how much time we have. I think it was just slotted for 1 hour. Is that correct? So we might have time for just a couple of more questions. And I see that Patrick put a link to the book in the chat, which is fantastic. Thank you, Patrick.
He's very quick.
Yes. Any other comments or questions before we go? I actually feel like, it might be too quick, but I feel like we could have a full day workshop all together on this topic.
Yeah, these are issues which we all face, and there's a dilemma, there are tensions, there are pressures from your own institution. So, but we need to figure out a way, keep talking, keep interacting, and I think collaborative work really is something that we should move beyond our boundaries. Because now, if you see journals, you see the kind of list of authors, and you see them from all different disciplines. And that's the richness that comes in your work. So I would strongly say, in your own universities, reach out to people in sociology, public health, environmental sciences. And then when you plan a research work, you see it's so rich, you see, you know.
All right. Well, on that fantastic note, I think that we most likely have everyone's emails when you registered for the webinar, so we can reach out to you and share the slides. And previous recordings can be found on the the ISSBD.org webinars website. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us, Dr. Verma. We really appreciate it, and we've learned a lot.
Thanks, Tanya, and thank you all. I like the discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.